Welcome back, everybody. Today we are talking about the final act in the movie National Treasure, starring Nicolas Cage. And one of the major themes of this segment actually comes from the biblical story of Solomon. Although it's not explicitly stated in the movie, we're going to dig that up and some other historical stuff as we talk about this film a little more. So we are at the scene where they all arrive at Trinity Church looking for the treasure underneath the church. They're in these catacombs, and they're going down these old, broken down stairs that look like they're going to break at any second, and they do. And they move on to this old elevator that was probably... Do you guys think this thing would really work? I mean, it's been down there for hundreds of years, right?
I wouldn't be the first to try it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the engineers were good back in the day too, and it was probably sound back then. But yeah, a couple hundred years. That's
the way they explained it
for termites to chew on.
Yeah, the way they explained it was, well, it's just like how they built the pyramids and stuff like that. And then Riley says something like, aliens built the chamber. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Do you think that he's supposed to be the audience point of view? Because he's the one of the team that's not a archaeologist or a scholar. I mean,
I maybe a little bit, but I think he's more just the comic relief. You know, the goofy sidekick. You know, the guy who, we talked about it in part 2. He can do anything with a computer. So he's definitely not just an any person, but yeah, you know, that's a good way to look at it too. Though I guess he didn't understand most of the stuff, so he was just making jokes kind of on our behalf.
Yeah,
good point. After I came all around,
and the tension here is, and the tension here is Ian. Basically, they're all hostages at this point, and they've got Ben's dad hostage. So there's a lot of tension in this scene. And as they move towards, going down on the elevator, Ben doesn't want to go, and he's trying to talk Ian out of it. So he says, it's not worth it. It's not worth going down here. Do you think, since Ben's a treasure hunter, and now all of a sudden he's been so driven to find this treasure to prove that his family's not crazy, he's kind of hit his limit here. So do you think he's sort of having a change of heart, or he's just found his limit, or what do you think's going on here with him?
I think he's worried about everyone else more than anything. If he goes, that means everyone else is going to go, and that means everyone else could get hurt or worse. So I think he's kind of looking at it like, all right, let's leave and I'll come back later by myself or something like that, maybe. Because, I don't think he wants to put everyone in that kind of danger, especially his, father, his best friend, and this new woman who he's kind of fallen for. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because this is the guy who stole the Declaration of Independence, and now he won't go down there. So I wondered, is it a character change, or is it just, it's just not worth it? You don't want to risk their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They find a clue. Basically, they're trying to get the upper hand again. Ben and his dad are trying to get the upper hand on Ian, and they think they can kind of turn the tables by giving Ian a fake clue about where the treasure is. So they say something about, it's there. The one lantern is the key, and some link to Paul Revere, but it's a fake clue. Drew, you can explain this part, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, during the Revolutionary War, the beginnings of the Revolutionary War, everyone knows about Paul Revere's Midnight Ride and the lanterns hanging in the top tower of the Old North Church in Boston. It was 1 by land, 2 by sea. So that's what he was referencing there. He's seeing the lantern, and he's like, oh, they're referencing the Old North Church in Boston where, Paul Revere started his Midnight Ride, and as a way of trying to get Ian to leave and head to Boston. And since we've been doing a little bit of historic facts, everyone pictures Paul Revere riding through the midnight, and it's cold, and he's yelling, "The British are coming!" No, not exactly how that happened. So his ride took place on April 8th, 1775, and he was in Charleston, which is across the Charles River from Boston. And he did see the lanterns in the tower, and he and William Dawes took off on their horses, and they were going to be on their way to Lexington, where they were going to meet up with John Hancock, not Herbie Hancock, like they say in Tom.
That would have been cool.
And Sam Adams, the beer guy. And they're going to meet up in Lexington, which is 10 miles away. And along the way, they stopped and they alerted up to 40 other riders who branched out in other directions, basically to warn any Massachusetts militia that the British were landing in Boston and were going to be marching towards Lexington and Concord. So, yeah, they ended up making it to a town called Lincoln, where the 3 of the men were captured, including Revere, and they questioned him, and then they ended up releasing him, and they didn't really have any evidence that he was doing anything. And, of course, the next day they had the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which started off the American Revolutionary War.
Wow.
So there's your history lesson.
Yeah. But that turns out to be a false clue, right?
Yeah, it turns out that the clue that he was sending was just to get Ian out of here and make his way to Boston. And that's the time where Ben knew that this is where we need to be. So that's where he took the pipe, and he was able to put the pipe into the wall as a key to get everything to open up. But
yeah, because
it was a believable clue because he knows so much about history and the way he says and presents it. Yeah, he thought fast. It was an accurate clue. It made sense. So, yeah, I can see you buying it. And I don't think Ian I don't think he studied history, so that's why he needed Ben so much. So I think he was pretty much, relying on Ben to come up with all this stuff. So, yeah, he traps him in here, and he's like, oh, I'm on my way. I got the treasure now.
Yeah, I don't know if this says something bad about Ian or the script, which I think has been pretty good overall. Really good. But when you get down here, all the way down to the bottom of these catacombs, or whatever it is, this chamber, it's surprising there would just be another clue down there. Because, you're in a big treasure type chamber, right?
Right.
You go all the way down there past all these risky old termite ridden elevator. You go all the way down there just for a clue. Like, that is the type of spot the treasure would be. So maybe it's a little surprising that Ian believes it at first, in my mind.
Yeah, it might be. And I don't know, I can't remember if they mentioned it or not, but the Trinity Church that they're in, which is in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, that's actually the 3rd building built there. So one of the things would be that, you have the first one that burns down, they make another one, something happened to it, they have to build a 3rd one. You'd think while building it, if there were catacombs underneath there, that would have been found, right?
Unless the Templar Knights are still around and they were protecting the secret. So they brought in contractors who were also part of the Templar nation.
Right.
Like, you've sworn to secrecy. Do what you need to do down there, but keep it
quiet.
Close it. Yeah.
Right. So, but if I can't remember if it, like I said, I don't know if it was mentioned if that was the 3rd church built. So if it was mentioned and Ian's going down there knowing, well, this is the 3rd building that's been on this spot and no treasure was ever found here, maybe him giving another clue would have been more believable at that point.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, but I can't remember if they actually ever mentioned. I don't think they did. I think they just said the Trinity Church.
And you've been to this church, correct?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
You want to tell listeners about that?
Yeah, it's I was there in spring of 2002. So when I went, we were basically down, this is right after 9/11. There was a lot of buildings still had, they still had covers over them from the damage. You could still see the damage. We went to where ground zero was, and you could see the holes where the buildings were at. And right behind you, when you cross one street, is where Trinity Church sat. And it had a little bit of damage to it, so they had some of it tarped off. I wasn't able to go in, but we could walk around it. There's an old little cemetery back behind it. Tombstones are really hard to read at this point, because they're so old. But Trinity Church is where George Washington did his worship on Sundays when he was president, because at the time our capital was in New York City. So that's where, Washington and a lot of founding fathers actually held their services, was in Trinity Church.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize how famous the site was when we were watching the movie then.
Yeah, it's been there forever. I can't remember the exact date of when it was built, but I know there was 3 of them. And at one point, it was the tallest building in Manhattan.
In the 1800s?
Yeah, with a steeple before they started building, bigger buildings. But
wow.
Our first capital was in New York City. So that's where Washington, his office, his townhouse, and everything was right there in Lower Manhattan. So,
wow.
Yep.
And you said it was damaged by the 9/11 attacks too.
There was a little bit because they had some tarps over it. So I don't know how much damage was done or if they were just covering it to just protect it from all the construction that was going to be going on around it. But that area was still pretty well disaster zone. So I'd like to go back and check it out now because they might actually let me go in and see it.
Yeah.
But
look for the catacombs yourself.
Try to find the catacombs.
Find out if that elevator's really down there.
Yeah. But no, it was a neat building with a lot of history behind it. And so if you're going to go to New York City and you want to see it, it's at 89 Broadway, Lower Manhattan.
Very cool.
Yep.
And one more point, you mentioned how Ian may not be tricked into leaving after they go so far deep. If you think about it, they've been all over the world looking for different clues. So like they were in Antarctica or somewhere cold and snowy when they were in that ship and found the pipe. So they were on one side of the world there. Then they had to go to DC. They literally had to steal the Declaration of Independence, which took them to another place. So, they were traveling plenty of places and going, and, they showed up in one of those huge snow driving machines, and they're get to that ship. So they went way out of their way to just get that clue. So it's like, oh, there's another clue. So,
okay.
Yeah,
so maybe this is just kind of the run of the mill when you're treasure hunting.
And Boston would make sense too, because they've hit, they've been to Washington, they've been to Philadelphia. Now they're in New York. And Boston's another important city during that revolution. So, it's not that far-fetched that Boston would be included.
Okay. So when they give Ian that false clue, he traps them down there in that chamber. So Ben and his dad and Abigail and Riley are stuck down there. They think they're never going to get out. And Ian and his crew, they leave. And that's when Ben figures out how to open up the actual treasure chamber. But before that, when he thinks that, oh, the treasure's gone, like, it's all over, we're never going to find it, he's disappointed. I thought this was an interesting theme, maybe a spiritual theme. His dad, he says something like, well, now we know that the treasure is real, though. And he almost acted like, to him, that was the most important thing. Like, they didn't find the treasure, but they found the room it was in. So now he knows, like, his dad and his family was not crazy when they were, looking for this treasure their whole life. So he's finally proud of his son for not giving up, and he's happy to be proven wrong. I really liked that, and not remembering this movie very well, I wasn't sure if they actually were going to find the treasure or not. I was sitting there like, oh, is this movie going to end and they never find it? Is that what part 2 is?
No, that is going. Yeah, and I think when it came, obviously, spoilers towards the end, they find the treasure and they give 98% of it away or something like that. So obviously it wasn't about the money to Nick Cage or his dad. They just wanted to show that it was real. And the fact that they found it was just icing on the cake. So yeah, interesting way to look at it and think about it, but still.
Yeah, and I liked that now his dad finally wants to keep looking for the treasure. Before he was like, "You guys have wasted your life going after this treasure just like my father and his father did." But now that he knows it exists, it's almost like his faith was restored. So he is now ready. He's like, "Well, we didn't find it, but let's keep looking together." That was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
The way that they find the treasure, Nick Cage's character Ben, he says the builders would have built a secondary shaft down for air in case of a cave-in. I don't know if that's true or not, but that sounds realistic to me.
Sounds plausible.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Although it'd make it easier to find. I actually think we saw that when we watched Uncharted. It's a very similar film, but remember how they enter that chamber through like a sewer gate near Papa John's or something?
Oh yeah. There's always that second way in.
But this was more believable. And in that movie, I was like, what the heck? How did someone not see this for all these years? So when they get into that treasure chamber, this is where it gets really interesting to me because, I'm a theology nerd. So I actually saw the biblical ties here because they find Solomon's treasure. We talked about in part 1, he had all those treaties with the other nations to consolidate power and try to make sure that Israel could stay powerful. He married the Egyptian queen. So here you see all this Egyptian treasure and Mesopotamian looking stuff. And I wanted to pause and see how many different civilizations I could pick out. But it looked to me like they knew that about Solomon, and they made that treasure room reflect like the actual history behind King Solomon. So that was kind of cool.
That is cool, yeah. Especially for people who know that like you.
Yeah. And then the big theme of this section is they believe that treasure is too big for any one person, right? So that's why the Templars hid it, because they thought that it was so much that it would corrupt someone. And that's the reason that Nick Cage ultimately, I think he said he takes, did he say 1% or 2%?
He took 1%.
Yeah. So the detective asks him what he wants, and he's like, I really want to not go to jail. But then we find out that they ended up giving him 10%, or they offered him 10% of the treasure, and he turned that down, and he takes 1%. So he said it's just too much. It's almost like he knew that this treasure would corrupt them. And this is where that other biblical tie-in comes from. I wonder if they got that idea from Solomon himself, because Solomon is actually kind of a corrupted king. Like, you don't really get that from the story, from like the Sunday school version. But if you know the story well, then you'll know that he was so concerned about maintaining his power and Israel's power that instead of doing all the things that in the biblical story God had told the kings to do, and God would protect Israel and bless Israel, he decides he's going to keep power in Israel by killing his enemies and like hoarding treasure and power and women and all this stuff. So he's actually getting corrupted by all of the stuff that he has and all of the power. And it ends up turning Israel kind of backwards, and they end up getting conquered after Solomon dies by Babylon. So I thought that was really interesting, because they took this thing that happened to Solomon and they kept this part. Okay, this treasure corrupts people like through the ages, and they made it into this like legendary thing. And so now Ben Gates won't take the full treasure because he knows the history behind this treasure.
Yeah.
But they don't really say that that's what happened to Solomon, but they say that the knights hid it because they knew that this treasure might corrupt someone or something.
Yeah.
So there is a link there. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and they offered him that 10%, and he turns it down so that it can go to museums. So it can be
straight out of Indiana Jones.
Yeah, it belongs in a museum. And he actually put it in a museum for everybody else to be able to look at and enjoy it, and might have that same, because that's what he does. Like, he gets that enjoyment of finding these relics and stuff. And yeah, the 1% he did take, though, was obviously a lot of money, because he was doing pretty well with that 1%. So he probably thought, I'll take the 1%. No one goes to jail. You guys take the treasure, and I'll buy a mansion.
Did they say how much money they thought it was worth?
If they did, I don't remember. I know it was a lot.
I thought I heard billion at some point in the movie, and I don't know if it was just a...
I would assume, it'd be up in the billions. I mean, if you really think about it, 1%, that house they bought at the end, I mean, that was on acres and acres of land. And it was a historical site as well, so that ups the price. You got to imagine that house and the land alone is probably... And did they even say where they were? I can't remember if they said where. I'm
going to assume they're somewhere near D.C. But
yeah, D.C. or it's
Virginia,
in that New England
Maryland
area. Yeah. So you're talking, that's got to be a $50 million complex minimum.
Yeah.
And just wait until we get to the next film and you see how Cage dresses compared to this film. He's like he's trying to be a throwback to some old school colonial, hero of his. It's kind of funny.
But 1%, they made plenty.
Yeah, I mean, Riley had enough to go buy his... What did he buy? A Ferrari or...
A sports car? I don't know.
Yeah, at the beginning of part 2, he'll have a Ferrari, yeah.
Yeah, well, he buys it at the end of... He has it at the end of the first one.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
So it's... so it's like, they're doing okay.
Well, I did like when Ben's in the church talking to the detective, telling him, I really don't want to go to prison. Before that, he says the Declaration is not a bargaining chip, because he'd given it back to the detective, and the detective's like, what'd you do that for? Like, that was your one bargaining chip. That was your ticket to freedom. But he gives it up, I assume because he thinks that's the right thing to do, in keeping with the theme that this whole time he is like an uncorruptible hero. That's the kind of person he is. But while he's saying the Declaration is not a bargaining chip, they cut over to Abigail, who's sitting at the back of the church watching, and you see her response to that, the expression on her face. And I think what that's trying to say to the audience is that she's kind of starting to go head over heels for this guy. She knows that he's a good guy because he did this, and that's the thing that probably solidifies their relationship, and they're going to be an item now. So
you got that. Plus, I think she believes the same thing. I mean, him saying that it's not the Declaration isn't a bargaining chip, that shows how much he respects history and respects everything that they did. And at that point they were starting to fall for each other, but I think she was smiling as well, because she's like, I agree with that. She is into history and America and everything like that just as much as Gates was. So
she's like, oh, now I know we're soulmates.
Yeah, well, and it could be up to that point that maybe she didn't have 100% trust in him at that point either. Mm-hmm. Like, what is is this a front that he's putting on? What is his main goal here? And for him to just turn that over is, exactly what Doug had just said. He has such an appreciation for history and for these artifacts and for the Declaration of Independence and, the Constitution and all these historical papers that made our nation, that it's just, he just knows it's just not right to use that piece of paper that way, for out of respect to the men who fought for that and signed that and drew that up, so very cool. But I think that's her kind of coming to realize that, he really is a good guy.
Yeah, I mean, he did steal her fingerprint earlier and steal the Declaration, so
but he had a good reason to do it.
Yeah,
but he had a good reason.
Yeah, of course.
It's okay to do that crime if you've got a good reason behind it. If he didn't steal it, somebody else was going to, and they wouldn't have given it back.
True.
Yeah. Well, since this is Movies Are Spiritual, I'm wondering, what spiritual takeaways did you see written into the film? And were they intentional, or are they just something that you saw in it that may have been here, put here by the writers subconsciously? Or what are some of the spiritual messages you saw here?
Well, they did talk about the Templar Knights to begin with. I mean, they have a lot to do with, maybe they're not in the Bible, but, they are very spiritual people. They were on missions for God. So a lot of talk about the Templar treasure, the Templar Knights and everything definitely brings out a lot of spirituality throughout the movie. Kind of adds to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that, how we said the Templars hid this treasure because they knew it would corrupt people. So they're trying to do their job. They're trying to do their spiritual job of doing good, and they hide this thing away that they believe can be harmful.
Yeah. Two, and this goes into part 2 as well. A lot of it has to do with family. This one is all about him proving himself, or proving that, his dad, his grandfather, and great-grandfather weren't crazy. This was something that was important to the family, and now he has proven that and made the Gates family name important in history, which is, something he was working for. And that's, when we do part 2, that's going to be the same thing. We'll go into it then, but it's all about saving his family's name again when it comes down to it.
Yeah. That's kind of a justice issue, Like he's been a mockery of, they say, of the academic circle for years, and historians, they laugh at him because they think his family's crazy, and he's trying to find the truth and expose it. So he's seeking justice for this thing, this injustice that he's been on the receiving end of.
Most definitely.
Well, I saw a really interesting quote when I was kind of looking into some of the background on this film, and I can't remember where I saw it. So the person who wrote this or said this sees this. I'm not copying it. These are not my words, but they were talking about like liberty and freedom for all people, which is what the Declaration of Independence stands for. And they brought up a point that the national treasure might not be this fortune underneath, Trinity Church Trinity Church. The actual national treasure in this movie is the Declaration of Independence itself. And I thought that was a kind of an interesting way to look at that, because that's the paper. That's the paper that gives us, that's where we declared our independence from a tyrant 3,000 miles away who is oppressing us and taxing us. And, we had no say-so in any of this stuff. We just had to do what we were told. And, and when our founding fathers got together and decided enough's enough, and they wrote that piece of paper to declare, we're not subject to you anymore. You don't have that right. And, that's just starting your own nation and going out on your own, and the risk that you took to do that is amazing. So again, I wish I could remember where I saw that. It was just somebody had said that, and I saw it, and I thought, that is absolutely fantastic, because I never thought about it that way, that the actual national treasure is the Declaration of Independence.
You know why that's hilarious to me is because, I'd seen growing up the trailer so many times when I was in middle school, and that scene where Nicolas Cage is like,
I'm going to steal the Declaration of Independence.
Well, it never dawned on me that the treasure underneath the church was the national treasure. Like, I always saw it as the Declaration. And it might be because I knew that the treasure itself actually came from Israel and in Jerusalem. I never connected that, like, the treasure itself was the title, National Treasure. I always thought of it as the document itself. So that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
You and me were opposites there.
Yeah, okay. So I'm sorry. I got to give credit. So that, what I read that actually came from movieguide.org.
Okay.
I was just kind of thumbing through it, and I came across that. They said that the title of National Treasure is actually ironic, and the irony is that it's not about this gold and all that treasure. It's this. And I thought, wow, that is very interesting.
I noticed, we talked a little bit about it, but I noticed that Nick Cage's character is basically almost completely incorruptible in this film. There's one part that maybe didn't age real well in the middle, in the heist scene, where every time Abigail talks after she catches them with the declaration and she gets in their van, he's always like, stop talking. I think he's trying to think, he's trying to solve things, but like you don't really know if it's that or like if it appears degrading to women. But if you throw that out, I mean, we talked about how many times he could have had this treasure or didn't have to give back the declaration, or at the beginning when he's about to steal it, he says, if you have the power to stop something bad and you don't act, like you have a responsibility to act if you see something that's wrong. So you see that, and I take it that he was not going to steal the declaration until Ian was going to steal it. Because I took it like he was like, okay, I can't pursue this treasure anymore because the map's on the back of the declaration, and I can't touch that. But when he finds out that Ian is going after it, that's when he starts to plan for it.
Yeah.
So I looked at him as almost an unrealistically uncorruptible character, maybe. I mean, I'm sure you could find some people out there you would hope to, but it's a picture of what you may aspire to be like. If you're trying to be a good man, then here's a picture of what that would be that is usually unattainable for us humans. But I think it's cool sometimes to see that in a movie, and you see it in Batman in the 90s comics. Not necessarily the movie, because Keaton, puts dynamite down people's pants as Batman and Batman Returns and stuff. But
It strapped that dynamite to that one guy.
Yeah,
I
I do like to see those uncorruptible characters. Sometimes I like my characters realistic, but sometimes I like to see, oh, that's the person I would like to be like. And you mostly see that here. So that's one of the spiritual themes I saw.
Yeah. I think this is probably my favorite, might be my favorite Cage character.
It's pretty good.
Definitely one of.
Yeah. It's very, very good.
I like him in The Rock.
Yeah, that's good too.
That's just stupid fun. But he's just got cool lines in there too.
Yeah. And I mean, and once again, Cage doesn't really disappoint usually in his movies. He usually is, they're entertaining in one way or another.
Yeah.
Good or bad, they're going to be entertaining in some way.
So, final verdict. I'm not in much suspense, but do you recommend National Treasure?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. I've loved this movie since it came out, and that, again, being a history buff, I studied it. Like I mentioned, I studied it in college, and I've always read stuff. My library books right here, if I go down, it's just nothing but American Revolution books that I have read. So when this movie came out and they're doing all this historic stuff and talking about it, it just immediately catches my attention. And the same goes with the sequel. The second one does the exact same thing. And I've been to some of the locations in the second movie too. So yeah, this movie is just fun. It's kind of like an Indiana Jones without the bullwhip and the guns. Well, there's some guns, but it's a fun movie.
Yeah, I was going to mention that with Indiana Jones, because Indy kind of, I mean, obviously there were treasure hunting movies, back in the day, but I think for our generation and younger, Indy was kind of the staple to that treasure hunting. And there'd been other treasure hunting movies and these and that coming around. They don't hold up the way Indy did. And I'm not going to say whether this is better or worse than Indy, but it definitely holds up to it. It's entertaining. And no offense to anybody who likes some of these other movies, but like the Lara Croft, the first one, first one with Angelina Jolie, I think they made two. Man, that was just not And again, it's my opinion. I'm not going to say it wasn't good. It just didn't catch me. You know, it didn't do it. You know, the one we did earlier, she mentioned, and I can't even think of the name. Uncharted, yeah. It was that memorable for me.
Yeah.
Just didn't hit the mark. This one and part 2 definitely did.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
This one's like Indiana Jones if you took out the supernatural stuff and you tried to make it a little more grounded.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I definitely recommend this film. It is smartly written. The clues, they are not like... You know how in the first episode, when we talked about the history before you watched the film, I mentioned I was looking to see how they handled conspiracy theories. This conspiracy theory about the Declaration. Will it be empty, or will there be actual evidence leading their pursuit, their quest here? And there is. So at the beginning, I liked to see Nicolas Cage trying to think through the puzzles and solve them, but there are specific clues that refer to other specific documents. There is an actual trail, however vague it may be, but some of those references were obvious to other historical documents. So there was an evidential path, and it wasn't as crazy as, oh, I have a hunch there's a treasure map on the back of the Declaration. That's what I was hoping to not see.
Yeah.
And this was a pretty rewarding treasure hunt. So I enjoyed it. Yeah,
They did an excellent job with the clues, because I mean they were believable. You could buy into what they were saying. Very plausible that they did something like that. So
definitely, and funny. Like I said, Justin Bartha's character, the sidekick, he is sarcastic the entire time, and it's my kind of sarcastic humor. So I enjoyed that. So.
It's probably one of Cage's best acting jobs, too.
Mm-hmm.
There was only one moment where I laughed at something, and I wondered if it was his idea or an improv, but it's when they're in his dad's house in the middle of the film, and they both breathe on the back of the Declaration. Like, he and Abigail, they get really close to each other, and they look at each other, and they exhale, and they're like, and I was like... Oh, that is so cheesy. Like, that's so ridiculous. That had to be Cage's idea. But otherwise, it's an excellent...
So, yeah, definitely.
Well, we are going to be covering part 2 soon. So if you guys want to go ahead and watch that, then you can watch our podcast as we talk about it and the history behind it and any spiritual themes we see. So, yeah, if you enjoyed this, hit subscribe, and we will be back soon.
Pachoo, pachoo, pachoo. And scene.